Welcome to the Sharing the Heart of the Matter podcast. Join us as we celebrate the brilliance of authors, storytellers, and creators. I'm Wynne, and in this great episode, my co-host, Vicki Atkinson, and I are with author Michael Antman. Michael tells us of the golden moment that led to the republishing of his book, Cherry Whip, 20 years after its first publication. He talks about self-awareness as the theme that runs through all of his books, and how he came about his own self-awareness. It was like discovering a waterfall that shed light on so many aspects of his past and character. We learn about Michael's experience of living in Japan and how that inspired Cherry Whip. Vicki and I ooh and ah over his sentences that are so poignant and funny. Michael tells us of the 10 years it took to write Cherry Whip and why he believes that was necessary time to wait until he knew the resonant point. Michael tells us of the outcome that he expects to create transformation in the reader. This is a great episode featuring a fascinating author telling interesting stories. We know you'll love it. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Vicki and I are so excited to talk to you. You have such an interesting story, and we love your book, Cherry Whip.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's very gratifying. And thank you for having me on your podcast.
Yeah. What's so interesting about this journey is that you're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the publication of Cherry Whip.
Correct.
But this book, you've just gotten what you've described as a second chance with the new publisher, Donovan Street Press, to republish it. So can you tell us the story about Cherry Whip?
Oh, absolutely. I wrote it back in 2001, and it took me 3 years to get it published. As you may know, it's very, very difficult to find a publisher back then, and probably even more so now. And I was very gratified to find a small, what's called legitimate publisher. That just means it's not a pay-for-play publisher. It was a very small operation, but very well run, and owned by a line editor for some of the major presses. So she was an excellent editor. So she took it on, and it remained in print for about 20 years, although on the one hand, it didn't sell very many copies because the original publisher didn't have a lot of promotional muscle. But on the other hand, it stuck around. And every once in a while, I would get a message from somebody who said that they were touched by it or liked it. And as you well know, it involves a young man with a condition called Guillain-Barré syndrome. And some people in the GBS community would contact me from time to time. So it kind of stuck around. It hung in there. And then one day, the publisher said she was winding down operations. This was after about 20 years. And the books were going out of print. And I was a little bit sad, but I thought, well, it had a good run. It had its time. And I've written several other books since then. And I thought, well, I'll focus on those. And then I consider it something like a minor miracle. A fellow novelist named Mark Rayner, who also published with the original publisher, had really liked Cherry Whip a lot and wanted to have me on a podcast to talk about art and my formative experiences with art when I was young. So we had a podcast and had a wonderful time. It was really enjoyable. And it wasn't until after the podcast aired that something occurred to Mark and also the co-host of that podcast. The two of them started talking about Cherry Whip, and Mark had read it, and the other gentleman had just founded a new press in Canada called Donovan Street Press. His name is Joe Mahoney. And he said, well, let me take a look at it. And he really liked it a lot. He contacted me and said, we were interested in republishing Cherry Whip. This was only a few months after it went out of print. And I was flabbergasted, to say the least, because my experience in life, I'm not sure about yours, but my experience is that if I really, really want something, badly and yearn for it and go after it and try hard. I never get it.
Mm.
It just never happens. But then sometimes unexpected things that I don't even think about, that never even occurred to me as being possible, just drop into my lap. It may happen, a few times in a lifetime. And
Yeah.
this was one of those golden moments, just out of the blue. And he said he wanted to republish it. And to say I was thrilled is understating it, because not only for me to have a second chance at life, but in an odd way for my protagonist, Hiroshi, who suffered so many slings and arrows of outrageous fortune in the novel. In a weird sense, he was getting a second chance at life.
Yeah.
So I said yes and signed on the dotted line, and they published a beautiful second edition, one I'm very pleased with, and I've just begun marketing it. And in fact, your podcast is one of my first marketing efforts.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just very, very gratifying.
Yeah, well, that's good. Although you're setting the bar really high for the results that you should come out of a podcast, because you said you had a great time on that podcast, and then your book got published again. I mean, I'm not sure that Vicki and I can live up to this.
We can say we loved it. And one of the
Right.
things I think is so amazing is that when you hear the story about this 20-year, sort of gap in time and the book coming to life again, some of our readers, listeners, viewers' first thoughts might be, well, how does a book that's 20 years old set in modern day hold up? And we're here to say, boy, does it.
It does.
Such resonant themes about, life and the complexities and the unexpected and resilience and there's so much cultural goodness, about art and music and just and the humor that comes throughout. So, anyone who's thinking, 20 years ago, oh my gosh, right?
Well,
it's very contemporary in every way about the human condition, right?
Well, Michael, give us an elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes.
I'll kind of give you an overview of what the book is about.
Okay.
And I would say that the humor was, as I'll explain in my overview, it was really a critically important part of it, because I think the human condition is essentially humorous, both in a positive sense and also in a sense of the absurdity and strangeness of life. So anyway, Cherry Whip is the story of this young Japanese jazz musician named Hiroshi, who comes to New York for his first big concert in America that's going to make or break his career and make his fame as a musician. So, of course, his expectations are very high. But naturally, as soon as he arrives in America, he suffers one embarrassment and ridiculous situation and cultural misunderstanding after another. And all of these ridiculous situations happen as he is sort of frantically and almost greedily trying to experience everything he can while he's in New York. Even at the same time, New York is completely overwhelming to him and baffling to him. So he's in a sort of a very frantic state of mind, just running around, experiencing things and having accidents and doing embarrassing things. So it's a comic novel, but I call it a comic novel, because it's a funny novel, but it's also a very serious one, because shortly after arriving in New York, he's struck with an illness that leaves him temporarily paralyzed, and the Guillain-Barré syndrome. And when he's lying there in a hospital bed in a strange country, he's forced for the first time in his life to confront why he's so frantically focused on new sensations and new experiences. And basically, he has a hole inside of him that he's never able to fill up, like a lot of us do. But what's more important is that he doesn't know why that hole exists, where it comes from, because he's one of those people that overthinks everything except what's really important. He understands a lot of things. He's a jazz genius, as it happens, but he doesn't understand himself. And a lot of the comedy comes out of the fact that he obsesses and overthinks about everything, in particular, trivial hurts and misunderstandings. But he never focuses on what really matters to him or in life. But he finally realizes over the course of the novel that the hole in him has something to do with the strange and tragic fate of his older sister back when he was a small child in Japan. And she has got something not quite right about her mentally. And it's something he's been suppressing his entire life. And in particular, his involvement with his older sister, his chance to basically save her. But he was too young to really do so. And he suppressed this without even realizing he suppressed it. And I think that's the whole point of mental suppression.
Right.
We don't realize we're suppressing things. We
Right.
don't do it consciously. So the novel is about his attempts to come to terms with who he is, while at the same time recovering from his paralysis and attempting to salvage his once brilliant musical career all at the same time.
Mm.
And that's why I call Cherry Whip a comic novel, but it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
funny, but it's very serious because
Yeah.
it's about a person who lacks completely in
Yeah.
self-knowledge and doesn't know
Oh my
himself.
gosh.
And his life is falling apart as a result because he doesn't
Yeah.
know who he
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And over the course of
Yeah.
the novel, he has two women who he meets in New York who help him along the way and kind of rescue him in a way. And of course, he resists every step of the way because, again, he doesn't understand.
Yeah.
But
Right.
but the novel was the first of the books that I've written, and I've written four now that are all on the same theme, which is
Mhm.
self-knowledge,
Yeah.
or
Mhm.
rather the lack of self-knowledge, the fact that people suffer because they don't have self-knowledge.
Yeah.
And I very much include myself in that category. It
Yeah.
Right. Right. And
took me
it's
way too long to gain
yeah.
self-knowledge in my
Right. Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Sure.
you're that quest for self-knowledge. I mean, it reminds me of one of my favorite lines from the book. And Trudy says, "We've got two conversations going on here at the same time, and you're hung up on the wrong one."
Yes.
Oh gosh.
I love that line.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one because he is so overcome by his impulses that
Mm-hmm.
as the reader is seeing some of these really like comedic choices that he makes, not
Mhm.
least of which, one related to the title of the book, which we will not give away, but
Yeah.
it's a
Right.
gem. It's a total gem. But these choices that he makes, well, he's missing these moments in front of him where the
Mhm.
opportunity to sort of through introspection or just the people around him that are drawing him to what matters most, he can't get out of his own way over and
Mhm.
over again, which is, I think why Wynne and I think that this is sort of a timeless story.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter when it was written. I think it has so much appeal because of that.
Mhm.
But as you said, there are those experiences that he has that are, horrific and
Mhm.
but it wasn't until he confronts this, life-altering medical experience, as you said about his sister Shizuka. Am I saying that right? Shizuka?
Shizuka.
Shizuka, that he begins to put pieces together. So I also took from that, it's a reminder that sometimes in the slowing down, because there
Mhm.
was a little bit of like mania in what he was dealing with as he landed in New York and
Mhm.
like you said, trying to feed himself. There's some interesting humor also about food in
Mhm.
general, some of his
Right.
choices, right?
Right.
But the reveals that came about his sister and her differences and how she was disparaged and what happened to her and the guilt that he carried for years.
Mhm.
Those were unexpected reveals, depth about what he was carrying that just Hiroshi is a very, very compelling
Mhm.
protagonist, I would say. Mm,
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
He's kind of an amalgam of three people. Uh,
yeah.
one of them was my father, who's nothing like Hiroshi, but who suffered from Guillain-Barré syndrome, and he
Mm-hmm.
became paralyzed from the neck down.
Wow.
And that was kind of an inspiration for the novel. What happens to a person who is so incredibly avid
Mhm.
and almost greedy for life and
Mm-hmm.
experience, who suddenly can't do anything?
Mhm.
And it can only think and only contemplate. And I witnessed my father going through that when he was quite a bit older.
Yeah.
And the second inspiration was a young Japanese man I met. When he got married, my wife and I invited them to America, and they had their honeymoon in Chicago.
Mhm.
And I talk about this in the afterword of the book. I've never seen anybody so avid for experiences. He didn't want to miss anything. It was almost like he felt this was the only trip he would ever take in his life, which of
Mhm.
course would not be true in the future,
Yeah.
but he wanted to experience everything. And again, I thought, what happens? First of all, why is someone have such a strong case of FOMO, fear of
Mhm.
missing out?
Mm-hmm.
It's almost always because they've got a hole in them. There's something they're compensating for, something they're
Yeah.
lacking.
Yeah.
And then the third person who it inspired the book was myself, because, as I mentioned before, I suffered for many years from a lack of self-knowledge. It didn't really prevent me from having a normal life. But I didn't really come to terms with a lot of things from my childhood. And I'm not implying that there was anything traumatic or terrible. There wasn't.
Mhm.
But I didn't really understand myself or what motivated me. And when I finally did, it was such an amazing revelation. It was akin to being on a hot, dusty desert trail and suddenly finding a waterfall and walking into the waterfall and just feeling drenched by the cool water. This wonderful feeling of finally knowing who I was and helping to be more effective as a human being. And so that became the theme in the preoccupation of all my books I've written for now, which is self-knowledge, or more accurately, the lack of it.
Right.
And it's a theme that I think is or should be relevant to everybody, because I do believe, and I don't say this at all in a critical way, that virtually nobody genuinely has self-knowledge. We react, we have reflex actions, certainly have desires and we have fears, but we don't really understand what motivates us. So all of these considerations went into my construction of the main character. And of course, I made him Japanese because I had lived in Japan for 2.5 years, and I was fascinated by Japanese culture.
Right.
And,
Yeah, tell us more about living in Japan, because
oh, sure.
how old were you when you lived there?
This was right after I got married. In fact, well, I had taken an earlier trip to Japan a few years before when I was single. And so when we got married, my wife and I wanted to have an adventure for our honeymoon. So we decided right after the wedding, we flew directly via Honolulu to Japan. And then we lived there for 2.5 years. And it was the best experience of my life. It was absolutely wonderful. And I wanted to write about it, but I didn't want to write about it in the typical cliched way of the foreigner encountering Japan and all the dumb things he did, even though I did an incredible number of dumb things, one of which I will tell you about. But I wanted to take a slightly different approach, which is to flip the script. What would it be like for a Japanese person to come to America and also have, really baffling and difficult experiences, in a strange culture. My interest in Japan really started when I was in high school and I needed a summer job. And I went to a dry cleaning shop and asked for a job. And the guy said, well, we need a porter. And I didn't know what a porter was. I'd never heard that term. So I said, what's that? And he said, get out of here, kid. Because I didn't know what a porter was. I found out later it was a janitor. So I went next door, and it was a Japanese radio repair shop. And so I ended up working there for the summer. And it was, as a stock boy, very exhausting job. And I would eat these enormous lunches just to keep my energy up. And one day, the owner, a Japanese, everybody in the shop was Japanese. He brought in what looked to me like snowballs at first. And it turned out that they were perfectly round rice balls, and he gave it to us, me and the other stock boy, for lunch. And I bit into it, and inside were these glistening orange orbs, which I, of course, didn't realize were salmon eggs, ikura. And I thought this was the most amazing thing I'd ever eaten in my life, because I'd grown up on typical American fare and hot dogs and cheeseburgers and meatloaf and all that. And at that moment, when I bit into that rice ball, I became transfixed with Japan. And I decided I wanted to move to Japan someday. And then I finally did it many, many years later, and it was a wonderful experience. So that's how I ended up in Japan.
And I love that you flip it around in your book. What a incredibly brilliant way of taking that experience and writing about it from a different angle.
Thank
But
you.
I was going to say, I really appreciate the fact that in the afterword you wrote about it, but I don't want to interrupt your thought, Michael, but we'll come back to that because I wanted to ask you about something you wrote there. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I always resist I don't like cliches, and I don't like doing what everybody else is doing. And I probably would sell a lot more copies of my books if I did. But I just wanted to take a fresh or different perspective. And I was fascinated by this young Japanese man and what was going on in his mind. I did have some temptation to write about my own experiences, which I ended up not doing, but I had some funny experiences in Japan. On my first trip before I was married, I kind of hooked up with a young couple, and I traveled with them. And we went to a town called Takayama up in the mountains. and it's a almost perfectly preserved village from medieval times, or perhaps before. Um, and there's all these quaint little tea shops and quaint little shops, and everything is very small, of course, because the Japanese people back in the day were short. And my friend, his girlfriend went off shopping, and my friend and I both decided to look at some of the little museums they had there. And my friend was 6'5", and I was 6'3", and so we had to bend almost double to go into some of these little museums.
Yeah.
So we went into one tiny museum, and there was a caretaker sitting there with his back to us, smoking his pipe, and he nodded as we came in, and we started looking at the pottery on the display shelves. And then I noticed that one of the pieces of pottery had a candy wrapper in it, and I thought, well, that's odd. And then my friend said, look at this one. Another piece of pottery on display had ashes in it from a pipe. And then we looked at each other, and we suddenly realized, to our horror, we had walked into somebody's home.
Oh my goodness.
It wasn't a museum at all. And the guy we thought was a caretaker was the owner, and he just sat there because he was terrified. He was literally frozen stiff by these enormous foreigners who had just barged into his home.
Yeah, two giants. They should take whatever they want. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Well, I wonder, that's hilarious. But I'm also going, okay, a writer, you never forget anything, right? Everything
Right.
gets saved for something. So I'm not going to make this leap, but you know where my head went. You see a candy wrapper thinking about Cherry Whip. I don't know. Does 1+1 = 2? Maybe. I don't know.
There's some connection there because the
Yeah.
title, without giving away too much about the story, the title alludes to Hiroshi's avidity for life and experience and his childlike nature.
Yeah.
Cherry Whip refers to a type of candy. When I first published it, people thought it was an S&M novel, or because of the word whip in there, or they didn't know what to make of it. And I deliberately wanted the title to be a little bit enigmatic because I wanted people to go, what is this about?
Yeah. Well, mission accomplished, right? But I also loved it. I don't want to say too much about this, but um, the day that he purchases the Cherry Whip candy, he also buys a packet of marigolds. And there's
Right.
some recall later in the story about what happens with the marigold seeds that just was so charming. It'll stick with me for a long time.
Oh,
But
that's great.
but I wanted to ask you about this because you wrote in the afterword, and Wynne and I were like, wow, this is so amazing. Because we love nuggets of advice, for writers. But you wrote, so we want you to speak to this if you would. You wrote, it took me 10 years to figure out what I wanted to write, speaking about your experience in Japan and this idea about Cherry Whip. Those 10 years were well spent because all along the little wheels were spinning in the background. As a longtime book reviewer and literary critic, I've encountered far too many novels over the years that didn't seem to know what they were about and that were written not because the author wanted to write a novel, but rather because they wanted to have written one. I mean, Wynne and I both went, well, drop the mic, done and done, right? That should go like on a poster. I could see tattoos maybe that would be appropriate to remind people. But that's such a statement making perspective about patience, and I don't know, it just seems like really solid advice. But tell us what you think about that. Is
Oh,
there
sure.
more about it?
I'm glad you noticed that passage,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it overlaps somewhat with my beliefs about self-knowledge. Again, it's about finding the exact right answer and um, finding the really resonant point of what it is that you want to do. And I know that because I've been a book reviewer and literary critic for many years, I know that a lot of books don't really have a resonant point. They may be extraordinarily well researched and even well written. I'm not talking about genre novels. Genre novels, the point is usually pretty clear. And I'm a fan of genre novels, but you know what it's about. It's in a mystery novel. It's about finding out who did it. And in a science fiction novel, it's finding out who they are these alien
Mm-hmm.
visitors. But in
Mm-hmm.
a literary novel, a lot of times you know that the author had kind of a subject matter or a setting or characters, but you finish it thinking, well, what was I supposed to take away from that? And I didn't want to experience that myself. I had attempted to write maybe 4 novels before my first novel, before Cherry Whip was published, and I
Mm-hmm.
abandoned them, each one at page 80. I call it the page 80 rule
No,
because
wait.
yes,
4 times, page
four,
80
four
each
times
time?
page 80 each time.
Whoa.
Because I
Okay.
knew at page 80 is when it dawned on me that I didn't know what it was precisely that I was
Wow.
trying to accomplish. What
Mhm.
did I, what
Mm,
what did I want people to take away from it? And so to me, there's nothing more important in a great novel than
mm,
coming away. And I don't mean it in the simplistic way of, oh, it has to have a lesson.
Mhm.
That there
a
has to be
moral.
a
Mm-hmm.
moral to the
Yeah.
story. They teach us in the second grade that stories don't have to have morals, and they're right. But this is a little bit different. You have to come away with a feeling, or you have to
Mhm.
come away in some way with a feeling that your life has been changed, even if it's only ever so slightly,
Mhm.
Yeah.
even if it's just a matter of your attitude being adjusted ever so slightly. And it can be positive, it can be negative, it can be unclassifiably ambiguous. But
Do you feel
nonetheless,
the word transformation come to mind? Because when you're
that's
talking, that's the word that I get from you. Is that right?
absolutely,
Okay.
because in virtually all literary novels worthy of their name, the character or the characters plural undergo transformation. That's almost the essence of a literary novel,
Mm-hmm.
and it's important that the reader undergo transformation as well. That they
Mhm.
look at
Yeah.
Mhm.
life or the world in a different way. And obviously, Hiroshi goes through a great transformation. He goes through
Mhm.
two. He goes from being, almost manic FOMO person to suddenly
Yeah.
being flat on his back and unable to do anything. That is a first transformation. And the second transformation is
Yeah.
when he comes to terms with who he is and what motivates him. And of course, there's a third transformation at the very end, which I won't
Mhm.
Yeah.
give away because I don't want to give away the ending of the story itself. But
Right.
Yeah.
but to me, that's the essence of good literature, and I think it's the essence of life itself because we're constantly growing and transforming.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm continuing to do that myself, and will can do so until the day I die, because that's
Yeah.
what life is all about.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
he revisits loss in lots of different ways. He
Hmm.
loses his clarinet. He's
Hmm.
lost some other things, kind of metaphorically. So I think, yeah,
Mhm.
Yeah,
transformation. Hmm.
Right.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, and
Yeah.
he's not very good at dealing with loss because he's had kind of a privileged life in Japan. He's a jazz
Hmm.
genius, and he's the
Hmm.
toast of the town. And he
Yeah.
walks into a nightclub with his gorgeous girlfriend, and everybody says Hiroshi's here. And suddenly he's in a different country and a an overwhelming city, and he loses
Mhm.
his father's clarinet that was a gift to him. And in my opinion, although this is not stated explicitly in the
Mhm.
novel, he loses it accidentally on purpose
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
has a lot of ambivalence about the fact that he's a soon to be famous jazz musician,
Mhm.
because it was kind of not exactly forced on him, but as you probably remember from the novel, his father torments him with his support. His
Mhm.
Yeah.
father pushes him so hard to become great at something.
Yeah.
And Hiroshi
Hmm.
sometimes feels like, I'm not sure I want to be great. Maybe I just want to be me.
Right. Well, and,
Yeah.
and that reminds me of one of
Yeah.
my other favorite lines from the book. Mr. Mori, his father,
Mhm.
Mr. Mori's effect, as with low levels of radioactive contamination, was cumulative.
Mhm. Yes.
I
Right?
love that line.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
There's
good.
so many good
Yeah.
lines like that
Mm-hmm.
that Wynne and I started trading,
Mm-hmm.
all the different annotated, kind of thoughts. And
Right.
so that about relationships, there were
Yeah.
so many kind of describing because there are a lot of people in his story, the
Mm-hmm.
people that he meets. But there's
Mhm.
also one that just kind of sticks with me early in the book. On page 28, he was observing a man because he's trying to take in everything he can about New York, what he thought
Right.
he would think about it, what he actually thinks. But you wrote, Hiroshi was observing a man walking so slowly, he appeared to be wiping his feet on the pavement. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, how does Michael do that? That was just so beautiful, right? Because I've seen that man. I've seen that woman, right? But there are just some beautiful
Hmm.
phrases throughout that really bring the reader
Yeah.
into the story.
So
Yeah.
true.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
So,
good.
Michael, we know that marketing a book, even the second time around, is time consuming. But what else do you have on your creative plate?
Yeah.
Well, the main thing right now, other than promoting Cherry Whip, is that
Yeah.
I've recently completed a novel that I co-wrote with a friend, and
Oh,
that's also very unusual to
Yeah.
co-write a literary novel
yeah.
because, and we co-wrote it because it's based partially on her life story. It's
Mm,
called A Distant Place of Slaughter,
mm,
and it's the story of how this young woman grew up in a leper colony,
mm,
and it's set in the present day. And you may be thinking, or your listeners may be thinking, a leper colony, they don't exist anymore. Well, they do in certain parts of the world. And she grew up in a tiny hamlet, is probably even smaller than a hamlet, in
mhm,
southwestern Russia near the Ukrainian border,
Mhm.
called Synagorsky. And it was built as a leper colony in the
mm,
Stalin era by this young woman's grandfather as slave labor during the Stalin era.
mm,
And this girl, who's based on my friend, grew up not knowing that this place she grew up in was built as slave labor by her own grandfather. And she herself doesn't have leprosy. It's not a very contagious disease, but she volunteers at the leper colony and goes home every day to the hut that she lives in with her mother. And her mother beats her up every day,
Mhm.
broke her nose at one time, wakes her up every morning with ice cold water
Mm.
thrown on her. Miserable existence. And so the one thing she's good at is chess. And so she kind of escapes
mm,
with the help of an aunt who herself had escaped to Frankfurt, Germany. And she goes to Frankfurt first to be with her aunt, and she goes to Paris, where she hustles chess on the streets of Paris and earns enough money for
Ooh.
airfare to America. But that's only the beginning of her travels, so to speak, because she can't at first come to terms with her past, with her
mm,
sadistic mother, her father,
Mhm.
who was also sadistic, her upbringing, and she's constantly faced with choices about whether do I try to be a. She's very good at being a con artist. You know, she was a chess hustler. Do I
mm,
con my way through America and make lots of money by being a con artist? And she does that for a while
Mhm.
and ends up getting in trouble with the law. And at the same time, her sister, her half sister, follows her to America, and her half sister is consumed with jealousy and rage and tries to stalk her and destroy her. And
Wow.
so again, this young woman is faced with the choice of do I do I sink to her level? Do I seek revenge back against my sister and against my mother, or do I try to transcend my past and become something more and become successful?
My
And I won't give
goodness.
away the ending, but she does contemplate at one point in the novel. She becomes a private pilot in Los Angeles and
mm,
takes on a ruse. She invites her half sister on a flight
mm,
in disguise. Her half sister doesn't know that it's
Uh-oh.
her. And she takes her on a flight with the intent of crashing the plane into the desert and killing both of them.
mm,
And that's sort of the crisis moment in the book where she has to come to terms with who am I as a person? Am I a good person or a bad
Yeah.
person? And I'm really not sure. Do I want to
Mhm.
live or do I want to die? And so
Yeah.
that's the theme of Distant Place of Slaughter. And just like all my other books, it's really, again, it's about self-knowledge. It's about
Yeah.
her coming to terms with who she is and what kind of damage was done to her and as a child and how she can transcend it. And like I said, it's based on a real life experience. And so my friend,
Mhm.
who's now a cum laude student at Berkeley University, has clearly transcended her past, but not without
mm,
difficulty and damage.
mhm.
Yeah.
As we all have in different ways.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Wow,
Wow.
that really, I mean, there's so many things about what you just described where we often hear from authors that sometimes the biggest challenge is to make sure that you're maintaining for the reader that the stakes are very high.
Right.
Keep that tension at a level where there's no slowing down. And goodness, I started to
Mm-hmm.
clench as I was just listening to you,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
kind of describe this storyline. There's a lot there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah,
Michael,
wow.
we are so grateful for you coming on talking about Cherry Whip and all the other stuff that you have
Yes.
on your club. Do you have a copy of the republished Cherry Whip?
Oh, I actually have.
Yay.
I have a copy right here.
And we know
Is
you
it?
have a virtual relaunch of the book
There it
coming
is.
up too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on the
Here we
20th,
are.
on the 23rd, there's going to be a
All right.
party. I'll be sending out
I love
invitations.
that.
That's the book
That's great.
cover. Very different from the original book cover. Thank you. I want to thank
Yeah.
both of you for your wonderful and perceptive questions and just for having me on. It's been a fantastic experience.
Oh, well, we love hearing that. Thank you so much for that, Kim.
Absolutely. It was our pleasure, and we wish you all good things, and we'll stay in touch because we want to know more about other things that you've got cooking. Sounds
Yeah.
pretty
Oh,
exciting.
absolutely. It was
Absolutely.
my pleasure, and thank you again.
Thank you,
Thank
Michael.
you.
Thank you for listening. Our music is composed for Sharing the Heart of the Matter by the exquisitely talented duo of Jack Canfora and Rob Koenig. For show notes and more great inspiration, please visit our site at sharingtheheartofthematter.com.